Hello everyone. On behalf of the Doing Sociology blog team, I welcome all of you to today's interview, which is on a theme very pertinent to today's context, that of caste and gender. Through this interview, we try to understand how the two entities intersect, giving shape to the existing realities in our society. As students and researchers in social sciences, especially sociology, it is extremely important that we learn both from theory and from the lived experiences of people. A deepening of academic engagement with any subject happens through conversations, through interactions, and bringing in different perspectives, different narratives. And we'd like to do that through this interview today. And in order to help us do that, we are extremely happy and grateful to have with us today Ms. Cynthia Stephen, who would like to be introduced as a thinker and an activist who works with the issues of the marginalized. So, Ms. Stephen is somebody who works in the areas of Dalit studies, affirmative action and education policy. She has written many articles and contributed chapters in different books on issues of Dalit women, Brahmanical patriarchy, caste discrimination, and many more. And she is currently the president of the Training, Editorial and Development Services Trust. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for taking time out to be with us today. So my first question to you is on the recent Hathras case. You know, post the Hathras, many have argued that there has been a new phase in the caste atrocity narrative. The caste rape itself has been brushed aside, and instead the responses to it are being labeled as instigating a caste war. Do you think this is a continuation, or has there been some shifts in societal dynamics in the recent past?
See, the caste war has been going on for 2000 years. There has been subjugation, systematic subjugation for so long. But in the course of the past 60 or 70 years after the Indian Republic came into being, and an equal, constitution with the values of equality and non-discrimination came into being, and also the system of at least attempting to provide certain amount of correctives for historical discrimination through the reservation as a right. You know, it's not, reservation is a right and not it's not arms. It's a right of every individual in the society to access education and employment. And now that 70 years of this should have happened earlier, but it's taken 70 years plus years for people to come to a situation where there are enough individuals to ask questions, and from marginalized backgrounds, specifically Adivasis, Dalits, to some extent Muslims, are beginning to raise voice against the superstructure of Brahmanism and patriarchy that has ruled this polity all these years. So it's not about the caste wars have been very long. It's the resistance that has been picking up more, strongly. And I think the important factor has been young people's first generation and second generation educated young people entering into the academic system, to some extent into media, and awareness growing in the public space about the discrimination that has been systematically followed, but ultimately now it is being given a face and a voice. Now I've been talking about, for instance, the women's movement marginalizing the concerns of Dalit women and subsuming them under a larger context of, domestic violence or whatever. Whereas it has taken us 25 years for people to start accepting that what I raised 25 years back, 20 years back, wrote about. I anticipated this, though I may not have coined the term intersectionality. The idea of intersectionality was anticipated by me many years ago, and I've written and spoken about it. But it's only now in the past 7-8 years that the younger generation came up, and now they are beginning to engage with that material and use it and taking it forward. So therefore, this is why the caste war was not happening, because people were not actually didn't have a language or a platform or a space to articulate. I think that is the change now. And so, of course, as a reaction to this, as every other social change process, the dominant forces are now beginning to organize and resist the resistance that the Dalits and Adivasis and Muslims are putting up to their exploitation. Yeah.
So, ma'am, when we talk about this issue, what role can the state play in pushing a society towards not just reform and equity, but also towards injustice and inequity? Because we always see that there is a criticism of the politics and the politicians as well as that of the state. So how do we understand that?
See, the state is not a neutral force. The state always has a certain caste and class character to it. Everybody knows this. And in India, there's no doubt about what the state really represents. The constitutional ideal or the Republican ideal is of representative democracy, or a Republican democracy where the voice of the people, the realities of the people are represented in the presence in the parliament and in assemblies, regionally. But what has really happened is that caste elites have continued to dominate the scene at all levels, and also naturally when caste and class sort of closely walk with each other, so there has been a domination by these two factors in the polity, in the state, in the nature and character of the state. And so you're not only talking about electoral, you're not talking only about the executive, but also of the other arms. The administration also is full of power mongers in the form of casteist, this extreme nepotism that takes place. The judiciary is a brilliant example of the kind of exclusion and exclusivity that takes place, that the kind of privilege that the privileged communities have continued to establish and increase their domination. And in recent years, due to the liberalization, economic liberalization, and the weakening of the state apparatus, I would say, and the economy, I would say that now there is it's almost like a free for all, and the powerful and privileged have taken a lot of ascendancy in terms of state power. So therefore, I said, what role can the state play? It can play both a good role and a bad role. So in the sense that the intention of the constitution is towards equity, towards justice, towards an equal society. But the forces are within the range of power, holding the power within the state, have tended to do the opposite. So in many ways, we have departed from the way the ideals that set up the idea of India, which talked about pluralism, which celebrated diversity, and which gave a space for a representation everywhere. And it was a beginning. The reservations for the SCs and STs is a beginning towards it's not an ideal, but a beginning towards a more representative democracy. But instead of going forward, we have gone backward. And so the real interests of the marginalized in the society have not been properly addressed. And the other big invisible constituency in our political space is, of course, women. Women have never been more than 15%, 12% in our legislatures and in parliament, and they continue to be excluded. So gender is another big area of want in terms of equity in our power structures. So there's far too few women in positions of power and decision making. At the same time, also the kind of religious diversity that we see on the ground in India, that is not reflected in the positions of elected representation. So there are lots of desirables which we should be looking at in the future when we talk about a representative democracy.
Right, very well put, ma'am. So we still witness people actually calling the Hathras case and many others like that just about rape and women and power, but they don't see the caste dynamics in it. So how would you explain that? Also, do you think there is a difference in how this happens in northern parts of India from that of the southern side?
Actually, I take those as two separate questions. The first question, you're talking about the Hathras case being talked about only as a power and rape issue and not about caste. I want to ask if it is possible to talk about power without caste in our country. Is there any caste which is powerful but is also marginalized? No. So the power, domination, rape, all these are clearly linked to caste. If people are talking about it, it means that they're trying to evade it or elide that reality. They're deliberately trying to say, don't make it about caste. The same Pallavi Joshi, who apologized the other day, she was the one saying, no, it happened to a woman. It happened to a, it was the same Pallavi, not Pallavi Joshi, Pallavi Ghosh. So this Pallavi Ghosh, who is a very well-known female journalist, but has shown so much of insensitivity. Is it really insensitivity or a deliberate attempt to deny the reality? How much self-deluded can you be? Is it possible for a person who has been a journalist in the public face for decades to talk like this? How is it possible? When they do their election analysis, they don't realize about caste. Every election analysis, they will talk numbers of castes. The Dalits are so many. Every minor inside the Dalit caste, there are so many subcastes and different communities. They will give you numerical breakdowns. In that, caste plays up in the electoral politics, but not in this kind of dynamics. In the gender and social dynamics, the caste is being denied. So obviously, this is deliberate. And obviously, this is something that people want not to talk about. It makes them uncomfortable to talk about it. And that is why they say it's not caste. They don't want to deny. They're basically deniers of the reality of caste. It cannot be accepted. Now, the second part of the question, which you said, is there a difference between how it's handled in the South and the North? Essentially, I don't see a big difference. In fact, if you look at it one way, it's unfortunate that basically the system, whether it is the judiciary or the executive, the way they respond to the kind of caste atrocities is the same across. Maybe it's a little difference in degree. The UP of the present day may be, probably the worst example of how not to administer a state and how not to respond to an atrocity, a caste atrocity. That's true. But it's a difference in degree. I think across the country we have seen, I have been part of struggles of Dalit women for justice across the country. I know I have first-hand knowledge. And there is not much of this. Okay, the judiciary in the officials, the government officials or the police officials may not be so bad as the DMs, for instance, of Hathras. It may not be so bad. But yes, there is insensitivity. In Punjab, for instance, in Haryana, in 2014, there was a series of 16 girls, Dalit women, young girls raped. I think people might remember that series of instances. Why did it happen at that particular time? And why did it happen in Haryana then? The reason is that it is linked with the struggles that the Dalits were making for Shamlat land allocations. Earlier, the Shamlat land, which is basically free grazing land that is at the panchayat level, panchayat used to auction it, and usually some dominant community Jat person used to use one of their serfs, their Dalit peasants, to actually bid for it, win the auction, and take charge of it. The caste, the Dalit, working class people there decided that they will not allow it in future. So they started making cartels and saying, we will, the Dalits will get the land. It's for us. We need to get it. We can't allow the Jats to enjoy even what is supposed to be given for us. So they started auctioning and winning these auctions. And so the Jats' access to the common grazing ground was reduced. So it was in that context. And who were the girls who were all raped? They were all girls who were in their higher secondary going to college, on the way to college or the back, coming back from college, that they were raped. So it's a symbolic thing. Throughout the years, I have heard in 30 years ago, we used to go to villages and hear about, a Dalit student who passed very well. He got first class in his 10th standard. And during the summer holidays, after the results came out, he was found dead in a well. So the younger generation who were coming up nicely were killed systematically. This is now the girls are coming out to study and try and getting some kind of formal education, getting out of the hands of the kind of servitude that they have been forced into. When they do that, they are targeted in this manner. So that is why you will say when due to reservations, if young people get into institutions of higher learning, whether it is university or professional education, there the system will try to marginalize them and drive them to their death. There have been a series I've been into those issues since 2005, 15 years. And we were documenting these for many years, friends, a team of us as part of that process. So there has been a lot of, exclusionism by the academic institutions as well of young people from not only Dalit and Adivasi origin, but also even of the, backward classes, because not all backward classes are financially sound or well equipped. There are marginalized sections in their in their ranks as well. So when those first time people are getting into college, they also face the same kind of exclusion because they lack a social support system within the academic spaces, and very little sympathy from the faculty, very few. And if there are faculty who support them and try to encourage them, they are also targeted, like Professor Hani Babu is being targeted because he used to be a man who used to work with the young people of the excluded communities. So there is a very, very clear-cut caste discrimination. There is no question about, there's no denying it. No, it's no more no one can deny it. It exists. And there is the other thing. This whole argument about merit. If you talk about reservations and, kind of restitution for the past wrongs, historic wrongs, they talk about reservation as if it's an injustice. The fact is, it's a sense of, to bring in the merit argument is actually a sign of extreme entitlement. People feel that only their community and caste have the right to higher education, and people who come in from in the first generation from poorer backgrounds, they don't deserve it, quote unquote, don't deserve it. The fact is, you guys have been there and have made it hard for others, and you are the ones who don't deserve it. I have a very authoritative article that I wrote. It is available in the public domain. It's called The History of Reservations in India from the 1800s to the 1950s. I recommend everyone read this article and see that. And also there is a myth that it was the British who brought in reservation into their country. Sorry, it was our forward-thinking local rulers, to wit, Sahuji Maharaj of Maharashtra and the Vadiyar of the Maharaja of Mysore, who were the two first, states who introduced reservations for a good reason. They found that all their administrations were completely taken over by Brahmins, and they wanted more diversity. They wanted more other people to come in. And incidentally, both Sahuji Maharaj and the Vadiyar community, they are from backward class backgrounds. They are not from elite backgrounds. They are not like, they may have been rulers, but they are not traditional Kshatriya rulers. People have to understand this. So even when we had princely states, they were not always, from the elites. There were also people from non-elite castes who came in and became political rulers. So we really need to unlearn a lot of stuff that a lot of the privileged baggage that our people in academic institutions carry needs to be shed, and they have to come to an understanding that now equity has to come in, and of course they have to give up some privilege. They have to, just like when we talk about gender division of labor, and we say men can't automatically expect to be served because they are males by the females. They also have to get up and do some work. They have to make their own tea, or put away their cups, or wash their clothes. So people, prestige has to be given up when we are talking about equity. You can't have it both ways. Yeah, privilege and entitlement is now being challenged seriously.
Thank you, ma'am, for putting it such articulately in front of us. So since you talked about educational institutions and all, my next question would pertain to the domain of knowledge. When we talk about mainstream knowledge, there are a lot of invisibilities. And when we say that we want to create, an equal society, we talk about, getting rid of those invisibilities. So I'll give you examples. A lot of us, everybody talks about the Mathura rape case, but the fact, but not that the woman there was an Adivasi woman, or the fact that Bhavri Devi was a Dalit woman. So, and who, it was her case which resulted in the framing of the Vishaka guidelines, and later on the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition Redressal Act. So, my question to you is, and we'd like you to talk about a little on, how Dalit women's lives and experiences have been crucial in the struggle for gender justice. And, but the fact that it has not been duly acknowledged. And connected to it is my second question that, when we talk about the mainstream feminist movement, what is your opinion on that? And do you think, what do you think about its ability to be inclusive?
You're right. It's two different questions. I'll address them separately. We have, as all of us as women, have been invested in the struggle for justice, because no doubt we have all had, two strikes against us because of our gender and our marginality in some ways. And so the struggle for justice for women, the importance of the centrality of feminist principles in that cannot be denied. But in the Indian context, I think what has happened is that one of the large advances that the women's movements have to show for their engagement with the past structures is certainly legal reform. So definitely, you're right. The struggle for justice, for gender justice in terms of the rape law, was certainly contributed by the Mathura rape case, by the reaction, or the response to the Mathura rape case. As everyone knows, she was a minor girl, an Adivasi, and it was a custodial rape. It was within the police station. So it had many factors, but the insensitivity of the system and the strictures, unnecessary remarks passed by the judge, so enraged, Professor Upendra Bakshi, who then wrote this article, and it was then picked up by prominent feminist scholars who were also, from a feminist persuasion, to take it up and make it into a huge response, built up a huge resistance movement, due to which the rape law was rewritten, shifting the onus of proof to the accused. Earlier, the accuser had to prove the guilt of the accused. Now the accused had to defend himself. It was assumed that the rape did take place, and the accuser had to defend himself. So it was a very important step forward, no doubt about it. Similarly, the long drawn-out struggle for justice for Bhavri Devi, which, by the way, is still pending. The case is still pending in the court, in the Supreme Court. The appeal, it has not come up, ultimately resulted in advances for all women because the POSH Act was framed. But who is the beneficiary of the POSH Act? The beneficiary of the POSH Act are women in the formal sector. The 9% 8% of privileged women who are in the formal sector. 91% of the women employed in this country are in the informal sector, and they're accessing the POSH Act cannot happen. In the same way, the rape law is there, but who have been the beneficiaries? The women who continue to be raped, the Adivasi and Dalit women. Just yesterday, the day before yesterday, the Hindu had an analysis of the NCRB data in which it's showing that there has been a huge increase in the crimes against Dalits, especially women, in the past few years. The beneficiaries of these, law reforms have always not been the women who form the mass of this country, but still again the privilege. For instance, one of the other things, in fact, this is an important law reform that is of property, the Hindu Code Bill, which Baba Saheb Ambedkar brought and resigned because the Nehru's cabinet, Nehru was not willing to pass it as it was. So he quit in protest. Later on, that very same Nehru passed the same bills in by splitting it into 3 or 4 portions and getting them passed. So ultimately, the bills were passed. What were they about? They were about inheritance and property. We are here talking again, who owns property in this country? Do the Dalits own land or property? Do the Adivasis own land? No. Again, here it was the privileged sections, the women of the privileged sections who benefited. Who lost out? Baba Saheb Ambedkar, who was such a powerful representative and such an important voice for the marginalized. He was the one who had to come out of the cabinet. Ultimately, that law was passed, but just by breaking it up into 3 or 4 portions. So in other words, even the legal reforms came at the cost, please note, at the cost of the marginalized. It is on their backs. I want to re-emphasize, it's on the backs of the Dalits and Adivasis that these reforms came for women in India. So therefore, having said that, now the second part of your question. So what about the mainstream feminism? I have been active in mainstream women's work since 1995, which is when I joined the UN World Conference, the task force, which was part of the coordination unit was run by a task force. Coordination units were actually there to coordinate the participation of grassroots women in the World Conference. So there was a big mobilization from the grassroots, because till that point, all the organizations, the women's work, all used to happen was Delhi centric. So there are some 5 or 6 or 7 women's groups which had their headquarters in Delhi, and all the dialogue with the government, all these reforms, all that used to happen at that level, and that was understood as the mainstream women's movement. There were women from the south who stood up and did a lot of organizing and work at the ground level, including, say, in Karnataka, there was Ruth Manorama. In Tamil Nadu, there were Ruth also hails from Tamil Nadu, but there was also Martha Gladstone, and there were also large NGOs. There's also like Vasant Karnabiran, who had an NGO called Asmita at that point, and there were others like Shashi Sail in Jharkhand. So these are all people. At that time, there was no Jharkhand; it was still a part of Bihar, so they were part of that struggle for the Jharkhand, separation of the state. So Adivasi movements, Dalit women's movements, and women's struggling for communal harmony in places like Hyderabad. So these were also there in the south, which were very large movements and needed. And then there was, of course, in Kerala, there were many. There was a Resli Abraham who had an organization called Anveshi, I think it was called. So like this, there were many of these organizations which worked at the ground level. So there was a need. People felt that there should be an all India character and not just a Delhi centric character. So that is how, in that background, that mobilization towards the UN World Conference on Women in Beijing took place. And so we took a very large contingent, of which I was also a small part, but I traveled across the country because of my language. I speak several languages fluently. So to talk about and raise the interest of people, get them to apply. And then we took about 169 or something people, from majority of them from the grassroots, to Beijing with us. And that is when it began to become clear that there was this, there's a kind of a separation between the way the mainstream women saw a question, and how then those who were not from that privileged background saw the question. And in fact, just before we left for Beijing, the National Federation of Dalit Women was formed in Delhi. And that's a federation of Dalit women. It was like, it's a federation of individuals. After coming back, there was this very large countrywide network called NAVO, which is a National Alliance of Women's Organizations, which work. And these were groups which worked on the ground. So we'd say Adivasi women from Kerala or Karnataka, or Dalit women from the slums, urban slums in Bangalore and in Madras or Chennai, and also say women from the Muslim community in Mumbai or in Hyderabad. So there, and also the Dalit women in Maharashtra. So there was a whole new layer or understanding. And I was also a little small part of that. And when we used to talk about, Dalit women's concerns, Adivasis women's voices not being heard, we were told, that by raising these issues, we're weakening the movement. We should present a united front. If we do that, then people again, who are on the other side will divide us. These were the arguments used to keep us quiet. But I've just hung in there and kept on talking, kept on speaking, kept on writing. And in 2013, when I had 2012, I had a visit from a young lady called Tenmori Soundarajan of Equality Labs. Then she was making a film. And she said, I looked on the internet and I found you because your voice was the only one, your name was the only one that popped up when you talked about Dalit women. I was the only one writing on Dalit women in the public domain. Please understand this. I went public. Why? Because I saw that there was so little response when I tried to get academic journals interested in what I had to say. I started writing. When I noticed this kind of a response, I dropped any idea of approaching academic journals, and I started writing in the public domain, not caring about who got access. I didn't want these ideas to be put behind a firewall for obvious reasons. It was already being stonewalled. I didn't want a firewall also to come up, with my ideas to come up with this firewall. So that is why I put it in the public domain, and that's how, my voice has been heard. I understand that my early articles that was when I just understood about the Dalit issue, about how it impinged on my own life. That's a story in itself. And that's when, the knowledge building process, that's when women's knowledge and thoughts and perspectives came into the academic sphere. How? Because people when they searched for Dalit women issues, my articles were found. My articles are apparently read across the world in universities relating to women's studies and gender studies, and maybe even sociology. So that's how you have to subvert the power systems. And that's how it has worked. So I don't believe that even here there's layers of privilege and access and entitlement at work. And I would say that even though I was not consciously Dalit at that time, even in the aftermath of the women's, the mobilization towards the Beijing conference, it was a few years later that I discovered that I was being systematically discriminated against. I began to wonder why, and discovered that people are seeing me as a Dalit, and I was not aware of it. I myself had no knowledge of being a Dalit till then. So that's a story by itself. I don't want to go into it, but I've spoken about it elsewhere. You can find it in the public domain. If people search, they'll find what I've said earlier. So so the knowledge building, the gatekeeping, what forms the canon, whose perspectives are important.
To add anything to what you were saying earlier when you got cut off?
I know, I think I was as more or less done with what I was saying.
Okay, okay. Then we can probably go to our last question. Uh, so, ma'am, we also see now that the media is much more visible than it used to be. So, what role do you think that the mainstream media is actually playing in portraying this relationship between caste and gender? As well as what about social media? I mean, somewhere you mentioned the Twitter debate on the term Brahminical patriarchy and how it has opened up the concept for debate, because it was something which was restricted to the academic world, but now it has also entered the realm of public discussion. So, in that context, how do you look at the role of the media as well as social media?
Yeah, see, the role of the media is basically status quoist at a very real, in a very real sense, because if you look at the diversity in the media itself is not a representative institution. Basically people who have interests in the corporate sector, in advertising, and then who have interest in being in knowledge building and swaying public opinion are there. Plus there is the caste elites and the political elites are in the mainstream media. So it's not a representative institution at all. Even if you're talking about and when you go, this is within English speaking in English medium press. When you go to the regional press, the discrepancies were even more stark. There almost no representation of, not even, let alone Dalits or Adivasis. There's no even backward classes represented in that. So I think we have to really then look at alternative media, and that is where social media has come in. So now we have found that the technology has developed to such a degree that it's possible for a small outlay to get a large audience for your work. So, and a voice, to find your voice, to give a voice to others who are wanting to speak. So that is why now we have YouTube channels, we have news channels on YouTube, which are with strong alternative voices. And in say, for instance, Urdu, in Kannada, I know, and certainly in Telugu, in Hindi, for instance, there are a lot of alternative media voices which have cropped up. And mainstream media is, if you ask me, becoming less and less credible. And I've seen things like 2 or 3 major business, like advertising houses, corporate houses, saying that they will be reviewing their decisions to buy time on channels which relay toxic content. And on the other hand, we also had the scandal of certain channels, including Republic TV, paying people to to artificially increase the TRPs. And so this whole thing is becoming unstuck. Ultimately, you cannot fool all the people all the time. That dictum still holds. So people are beginning to get wise, and they're also finding their own voices because of technology. And I think this has been this is also a very important factor. Like I said, knowledge sharing, which used to be gatekept by elites in the academic institutions, it's no longer so, because I chose to go public with my, when you don't care about getting remuneration, but you care more about the truth and equity coming out in the public, then you give up that claim and then you just go. And so that's how we managed to blast that area of knowledge open. So I think social media has had in most ways a positive role. I mean, yeah, it has in certain cases it has had a very negative role, like people buying trolls to troll your enemies, particularly during the your opponents, particularly during the election time. And both the previous 2 elections, national elections, were won with a whole lot of purchasing of media, electronic media in particular. I think that the law of diminishing returns will start operating in the next round. then the things will become a little more, clear, and the credibility will become, people will understand what credibility means and how it's valuable to keep your credibility rather than play for short-term gains.
Okay. So, thank you, ma'am. This has been very sweet and kind of you to take time out of your busy schedule. Any last thing that you would want to say to students of social sciences on how to study these kind of particular social phenomena and what to keep in mind?
See, unfortunately, I'm glad you talked about, gave me this opportunity. I think it's important. I noticed that I've done quite a bit of work with people in young people who are going for higher studies, and I noticed that in the beginning there's this huge rush for graduating in some kind of professional course in the science stream, and there's always this hierarchy that, if you're very bright and your best opportunities lie in the science stream, and then comes the commerce stream, also now quite competitive, but the arts streams are not so privileged, or they're slightly looked down upon. But as a matter of fact, I have found that a lot of medical doctors, a lot of engineers give up those professional courses and go into social sciences streams for their masters, for their PhDs. What is the reason? The reason is that, people have an intention. I mean, if you want to be relevant and significant, a contributor to society at large, money is not going to be enough as a compensation. Somewhere at a certain time, I know lots of people who also not only complete their engineering, they go into IT sector, they work there for many years, but after that they make a break and move into the social sector. And this has been a trend I've been noticing for the past 10 to 15 years, maybe more also. And that is the reason. The reason is that, money cannot only motivate you for a long time. You want to be a significant contributor to society. And humanities is one place where you can do that, because this is where you're looking at a large system, which is not always quantifiable. You see, in science, everything is quantifiable. Here, you're talking about much more qualitative kind of thing. The quality of life is something that is a combination of many things. So that is real life. That is where the rubber hits the road. That is where, people's life experiences can either make or break you. So the humanities are a very important part. And I feel that it's only in India that we have this artificial divide between the sciences and the humanities. Abroad, you can do a double degree in both fields. I hope we can all move towards that. And I hope that all of us will, and also a generation or two have grown up without properly understanding the real country, because the writers of textbooks have rewritten stuff or kept certain materials out. For instance, when we were growing up, hardly anything was taught about Ambedkar to us. But only now in this generation, we have seen how important personality and how his thoughts, not only on the constitution and law, but he had a very important contribution in economics, in river development, and in personal laws, so many things. So we've all been the losers when the minds of great people and their work is denied to us knowledge of it. So we really need to become more curious about our world and read for ourselves, not only rely on textbooks, and overall contribute to knowledge building. And as students who come to universities, I think we have a great opportunity as well as a great responsibility. So I just encourage each and everyone to put a lot of effort into what they are doing, and value every knowledge. Even people may not know how to read and write, but they have an unparalleled knowledge about the real world, their natural world. So Adivasis may be very poor and you might see them as disadvantaged, but within their own context, left to themselves, they are the wealthiest people, because they have all the means of life at their disposal. They know how to make a life out of the natural world around them. So I think this is what we all can aspire for making our lives mean to others, and also to make our surroundings become important to our lives, not be alienated from them, and not live in ivory towers. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those beautiful words. And I hope our young students actually learn a lot from the interview and the conversations that we have had. It's important for us to question our privilege, to learn about being self-critical, as well as to use intersectionality as not just a theoretical and academic framework, but to use it to understand our lived realities, our social realities, question our privileges and entitlements in our lived real lives. So once again, we thank you, ma'am, on behalf of Doing Sociology.
Thank you.